In Idaho, it's called simply Craig Wyden. Elsewhere, it's called the County Payments Act. Its formal title is the Secure Rural School and Community Self-Determination Act of 2000. Most Americans have undoubtedly never heard of it, yet the act is a key element in the life and survival of American counties where national forests are located. What problem was Craig Wyden a response to, and what impacts has the act had at the local level since its passage? Shoshone County, Idaho is one place we may look for answers. The American West has been under siege by a new breed of catastrophic wildfires for a decade or more. In 2002, for example, the Hayman Fire in Colorado and the Rodeo Chediski in Arizona were the worst ever recorded in those states. And the Biscuit Fire in Oregon was the most severe since the early 1800s. And there have been many, many more. Unusually big fires or fire seasons have occurred in the U.S. in 9 of the 14 years between 1987 and 2004. Fire historian Stephen Pine has written, "The succession of great fires over a handful of years appeared as a crash in nature's economy as profound as those in the stock market." Why this scourge? Part of the reason, ironically, has been our enduring national commitment to conquering wildfire. That commitment has a history. In August 1910, a great system of forest fires ravaged northern Idaho and western Montana. The United States Forest Service, which was created by Teddy Roosevelt's administration, was only 5 years old when the fire struck. Stephen Pine has argued that the experience of the great 1910 fire, also known as the Big Blow-Up or the Big Burn, had a deep, formative, and lasting impact on this new public agency.
These were not simply big fires. We have lots of big fires. Big fires come and go all the time. Great fires are big fires that make an impact on the society, on their sustaining culture. They interact with it, they interbreed with it in some ways, and produce dramatic effects. They get branded in various ways in institutions and ideas, and the 1910 fires did that.
The Big Blow-Up helped galvanize the fledgling Forest Service around a 100% suppression paradigm regarding wildfire. That paradigm made eliminating forest fires, either by putting them out quickly or preventing them from happening in the first place, the Forest Service's chief goal. Over time, this paradigm had a number of unintended negative consequences. Forest densities increased. Higher density, in turn, contributed to a shift in prevailing tree species, from less shade-tolerant trees to more shade-tolerant trees. New tree species were also less resistant to fire. Greater density also contributed to lower water supply per tree, making forests more susceptible to infestations and disease. Other things contributed to the West's recent bad fire years, too, including persistent drought and chance winds. There are 192 million acres of national forests in the United States, the great majority in the West. The greatest concentration lies in the northern Rocky Mountains. Shoshone County lies in the heart of this sea of forest. Its 2,640 square miles make the county about twice the size of Rhode Island. The federal government owns 3/4 of the land. 71% of the county's area is national forests. The populated I-90 corridor running from the county's western to eastern borders is flanked by national forests much of the way. Wallace, the county seat, sits in a valley flanked on all sides by forest. Shoshone County's forests experience the frequent rains that refresh the Pacific Northwest. The moisture is a double-edged blessing, however. Annual rainfall heightens growth, but also exposes the region to greater risk of catastrophic fire when droughts now and then occur. And they do occur. In 1967, dry heat and high wind created a massive fire that required calling up the National Guard to aid firefighters. The county's most famous blaze, however, was the Big Blow-Up of 1910. The eastern third of Wallace burned to the ground, leaving a scar seared into the county's memory. The Big Blow-Up also left behind many stories of heroism.
Well, let me tell you about the Pulaski story. In the summer of 1910, a number of small fires were created by lightning and by the railroad. Pulaski had a crew of about 150 men that were distributed throughout the ridges and areas around Wallace, Idaho. He was a ranger for the Forest Service. Things changed on August 20th. The winds began to pick up. Finally, a firestorm of epic proportions had started. So Pulaski, he rounded up 40 of his men and started toward Wallace. In the meantime, the Wallace citizens had started a backfire in an effort to save the city. So the two fires, Pulaski was trapped between the two fires, and he knew of two prospector tunnels that were in the area. Because of the dense smoke and fire, he was not sure if he could get the men to the larger tunnel. So he put a wet gunny sack over his head, and he made his way to the large tunnel to where he could see it, and saw that it was still open and that he could get there before the fire got there. At the tunnel site, he got in 42 men and 2 horses into the tunnel. However, one man straggled behind about 100 feet and was caught in the fire and never did make it. The heat was so intense on the outside, it sucked all the cool air out of the tunnel. So Pulaski ordered his men to lay down on the base of the tunnel where there was a stream running and to cover their mouths so they wouldn't suffocate. It reportedly was told that he had held his panicked men at gunpoint to keep them in there. Once they were outside the tunnel, they noticed that the fish in the creek had all died. The rocks on the stream sides were so hot they could not sit on them, and they had to crawl back to Wallace. Pulaski suffered burns, damaged eyesight, and respiratory problems for the rest of his life. A few years later, he invented the Pulaski, which is a firefighting tool that is used today.
Analysis of historical photographs shows that there is more forest fuel around Wallace and in the county now than there was before the 1910 inferno. Why? A century of better fire suppression is part of the reason, but there are other reasons too. A thriving local mining industry once had a hungry need for timbers to secure mine drifts. An active timber industry once provided lumber for the nation's housing boom. More recently, a vigorous conservationist movement has virtually shut down timber harvesting in the Northwest's national forests. Even in a period when the Forest Service is focusing on enhancing forest health, stewardship and other projects are stalled or terminated by court challenges. In August 2004, for example, the flagship Iron Honey project on the Little North Fork of the Coeur d'Alene River was halted by a federal court of appeals. It has been virtually impossible to build a new national consensus about forest management in the polarized social climate of our time. Stalemate has too often been the result of vying perspectives and opinions. One way or the other, however, the local population must bear the heightened wildfire risk and economic consequences of stalemate and inaction. Economic loss to the county and county government is also an important part of the story. In 1908, when President Teddy Roosevelt and Gifford Pinchot began staking out America's grand patchwork of national forests, Congress recognized that the federalization of forest lands represented economic losses to local community. Aside from removing vast tracts of forest land from tax rolls, counties would incur additional costs by having to maintain access roads, provide schools, and contribute to emergency services when called upon. An historic bargain was struck between the counties and the Forest Service. 1/4 of revenues derived from timber sales on national forests would go to county government. The arrangement proved satisfactory over the better part of a century. A vigorous local timber industry also meant jobs for local populations, children in local schools, commerce for local businesses, and tax revenues from property tax. With the decline in timber harvesting, so too did the 25% share of timber revenues going into county government decline and virtually disappear. The stalemate, the peril posed by massive forest fires, and the prospect of still worse conflagrations to come has prompted a number of important new initiatives in recent years. In 2000, Congress enacted the Rural Schools and Community Self-Determination Act, which is known in Idaho as the Craig-Wyden Act. Meantime, the Western Governors Association, facing up to the gridlock and wildfire across the West, fashioned a national fire plan. In 2003, Congress passed the Healthy Forest Restoration Act. Forest Service Chief Dale Bosworth has moved our national conversation about wildfire and forest management away from old ruts and focused it instead on the broad concept of how forest health may be improved.
My belief is that if we can't be efficient and effective, if we can't make decisions fairly quickly, there's no incentive for people to be involved and to commit their time to try to come up with an answer and a solution. One of the biggest disincentives for people to work together in a collaborative way to help us figure out which direction we ought to go, one of the biggest disincentives is the fact that we're unable to implement those decisions in a timely manner.
All these new efforts to recast the forest issue, however, have not yet consolidated the nation around a new consensus, nor have they given rise to the sort of broad and urgent action that many see as required. The county commissioners have been especially faced with the frustrating gap between, on the one hand, grand plans, and on the other, the paucity of actual, on-the-ground accomplishments.
We've had very little conflict about the worthiness of projects, more how much money can we devote to that project. We're helping out with the plaster project. This funding was better received in an environment that took care of forest health with some timber harvest and actually created real jobs on the ground in the economy.
Despite the shadow of gridlock, Shoshone County has important forest and wildfire work to accomplish, and it has made the best use it can of resources state and federal government have of late put at its disposal. In 2002, a comprehensive wildland-urban interface, or WUI, fire mitigation plan was completed. Roughly 1/5 of the high-risk areas identified in the mitigation plan have been addressed so far. Defensible space around structures and an apron of cleared area is created.
Primarily, the plan is focused on looking at the home ignition zone, and this is an area that is from 0 to 150 feet around homes. Within this area, what is desired to be created is defensible green space. What the defensible green space does is provide a safe environment for firefighters to help protect this structure in the event of a fire. They primarily want to see 30 feet of clean and green around homes, free of debris, shrubbery, evergreen shrubbery. Beyond that space, they would like to see proper spacing of large trees with the branches pruned up within that area. The tree species that we're most concerned about in the home ignition zone are the conifer trees. The deciduous trees that lose their leaves in the wintertime, such as your aspens and your alders and maples, are not as much of a concern because they have a high content of water, as where the conifer trees has a lot of pitch and resin, which are very flammable. In many instances in wildland fires is trees that are within 30 to 40 feet of an actual fire will literally explode due to the enormous heat generated from the fire.
WUI activities have provided the most direct and visible enterprise in the county. Under Title I of the Act, Craig-Wyden continued the flow of traditional national forest funding to schools, roads, and emergency services.
Shoshone County is the second largest recipient of Craig-Wyden funds in Idaho. Of those funds, we maintain approximately 400 miles of county roads. The difference in the Craig Wyden funds has enabled us to do a 2-inch overlay on approximately 24 miles of roads. We were able to chip coat almost 50 miles of roads. Without the funds, we were doing snow plowing and filling potholes.
The salary comes from Craig Wyden, and if we lost that, then there would be a good possibility that we would have to cut down our manpower because we wouldn't have the money to pay everybody. In a month's time, we can lay down anywhere between 3,000 to 5,000 ton of asphalt too. All that money goes to help maintain our roads, and I believe that Shoshone County are in pretty good shape, and that's because we have the money to maintain our roads.
Well, we have an anticipation that the Craig Wyden money would continue. You know, a lot of other payment in lieu of taxes fund programs have been around for eons, and so one would assume that it's going to be there. Because once you lose a school, you lose the community. And Craig Wyden monies have helped us purchase a lot of things for our new school as well as for our existing facilities. A lot of it is in technology. We resurface the track. We do our upgrades on maintenance with Craig Wyden bill money. Lots of things. So we can't go without. Heating system upgrades. Some of it goes to busing, sidewalk, it's desks and classroom furnishings, even consumables, texts, services, custodial supply, you name it. This is where it goes. And we've been receiving forest funds for several years here. It's survival without it would be real difficult, it's not impossible.
The Act created new funding for the development of a Regional Resource Advisory Committee.
The law requires the establishment of a Resource Advisory Committee, or we've shortened it to a RAC, to represent the public's interest in making recommendations to the Forest Service on expenditures of Forest Service dollars.
The RAC is a committee comprising 15 citizens, from conservationists to timber interests, educators, labor, outdoor recreation, schools, government, and even archaeological and historical interests.
We got a lot of work done.
Renata McNair, the designated federal official, speaks at the monthly RAC meeting. She notes the amount of work that has been accomplished by the group. Fuel reduction projects are the pride and joy of the committee, and the only way to reduce the risk of wildfire. In the last 3 years, the committee was able to increase the acres of treated area in the backcountry. More high-risk urban interface areas were treated. The projects gave the group confidence that in the event of a catastrophic wildfire, they would be able to keep the fire on the ground and out of the canopies. The committee is intended to be, and in North Idaho has worked out to be, a microcosm of the wider community. Private projects may be funded, provided that they can demonstrate a beneficial effect for public lands. The RAC oversees these projects. It provides an ongoing forum for discussions by RAC members and participation by the wider community. Its voting rules make it necessary for approved projects to have broad support. However, universal consensus is not required. The RAC seeks to achieve a new ability to accomplish work by bringing the community back together for face-to-face negotiations. The RAC process promises a fair share of wins for every membership group or perspective. The RAC also provides for strengthening connections between the Forest Service, Bureau of Land Management, other public agencies, and the local community. Shoshone County participates in the Idaho Panhandle Resource Advisory Committee, one of 5 RACs in Idaho. In 2 years, the Idaho Panhandle RAC has initiated and provided resources for a variety of projects.
The one that hits our county that's really helped Shoshone County was the $180,000 to $200,000 for the Pulaski project, because that was an all-encompassing project. It didn't include just recreation, and it didn't include just roads or habitat or water resources. It encompasses the entire ecosystem. We have not had any timber revenues off our forest in years. We really relied heavily upon natural resource for our monies for our county, and I think it's really important that the public get involved.
There are, to be sure, potential weaknesses in the RAC concept. For example, In attempting to maintain consensus, RACs may shy away from needed but controversial projects. Yet Craig Wyden provides the best game in town for building a new sense of community, the shared ability to act, an appreciation of common fate around forest and wildfire issues. Shoshone County and the other North Idaho counties making up the Idaho Panhandle RAC have welcomed, embraced, and made good use of this federally sponsored program. Under Title III, Craig Wyden provides limited funding for forest health-related educational activity at the county level. Shoshone County has made vigorous use of this funding as well. For example, in 2002, Jim C., a high school counselor and teacher, an outdoorsman, and a person with an interest in local history, came to the conclusion that it was a shame that the Pulaski Tunnel, where Ed Pulaski saved most of his crew in the big blow-up, and the Pulaski Trail had become virtually forgotten and abandoned places in Shoshone County.
There was little or no maintenance done to the trail or the tunnel. The trail became overgrown, there were brushy, wind-blown trees over it, and the tunnel itself was overgrown, and the opening had begun to collapse. So I thought something needed to be done to save this tunnel. We established a nonprofit group, we established a governing board, we held meetings, and eventually we got the Pulaski project online. Our goals are to save the trail, save the tunnel, educate the public about forest fire and forest management, and to provide a recreational opportunity in the form of an interpretive trail called the Pulaski Tunnel Trail.
He suggested that the educational value of Pulaski's heroic story and the great significance of the 1910 fire merited recapturing these sites for public use as educational, recreational, and historical resources. Jim C.'s idea soon expanded to include other elements, including a prospective interpretive center for the trail and an educational web page. The Pulaski Project was born. In light of its relevant educational potential, the Pulaski Project received modest support from the county's Craig Wyden Title III funds. That support, in turn, launched a number of new enterprises aimed at increasing public awareness. Following historian Stephen Pine's work, the working assumption of the Pulaski Project became, if the story of Ed Pulaski's heroism in the great 1910 fire helped consolidate the 100% suppression paradigm, then maybe the same story and history could be used to help emancipate us from that same paradigm. The project's plan to restore and develop the Pulaski Tunnel and Trail has proved to be popular not only in Shoshone County, but in nearby Spokane, Washington, and elsewhere in the Northwest. Senator Larry Craig and Idaho's other congressional representatives provided funding from Congress for the project, to be carried out by a partnership between the Forest Service and the Pulaski Project. Interest in the project has occasioned numerous newspaper articles on Pulaski, the historical significance of his story, and the new policy considerations that the Pulaski Project seeks to bring to a wider public audience. The webpage, newspaper stories, talks to community groups, invited lectures, and other project endeavors have all aimed at making use of the Pulaski story to raise consciousness and re-engage a wider public in the important forest management and wildfire issues facing the West. Is forest management and wildfire, then, a happy story with a happy ending in Shoshone County? No, not by a long shot. There is still a very long way to go.
In the early 1900s, President Theodore Roosevelt established the national forests. There was a realization that if you took 70 or 80 or sometimes even 90% of the land mass in the county, that was going to create an economic burden for that county to provide services. The counties and the schools agreed to provide services to those national lands and to the people that wanted to use those national lands. And the federal government agreed to pay for those services with the receipts from timber sales. Those timber receipts no longer fund those services. The schools and the counties have no choice but to provide those services and to keep our end of the bargain. The Craig Wyden safety net legislation is the way that the federal government can today keep its end of the bargain.
In Idaho, it's called simply Craig Wyden. Most Americans have undoubtedly never heard of it, yet the act is a key element in the life and survival of American counties where national forests are located.